I never expected a quiet walk through my garden to turn into one of the most meaningful conversations of my life. What my daughter's boyfriend asked me that afternoon made me stop, breathe, and look at my own life in a new way. Before we begin, let me ask you something. From which city are you watching us today? I'd always love reading where everyone is tuning in from. And if this kind of story speaks to you, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. It truly helps keep these stories coming, and it means more than you might think. Now, let me tell you what happened. I'm a woman in my early 50s, living in a modest house with a garden that has slowly become my refuge. The garden isn't fancy, but it's honest. Roses along the fence, a small fig tree my late husband planted years ago, and a narrow stone path that winds through beds of herbs. I spend a lot of time there, especially in the late afternoon when the sun softens and everything feels quieter. That day, my daughter Emily had brought her boyfriend, Daniel, over for a Sunday visit. They had been together for almost 2 years, long enough for me to see the way they moved around each other with ease. Daniel was polite, attentive, the kind of young man who looked you in the eye when you spoke. Still, he was her boyfriend, not family, and I kept a certain respectful distance. After lunch, Emily went inside to take a phone call. Daniel lingered near the back door, shifting his weight like he had something on his mind. I could sense it before he spoke. Years of motherhood sharpened that instinct. I was going to walk around the garden, I said, more to give him an opening than anything else. You're welcome to join me. He hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that, if you don't mind. We stepped outside together. The air carried the smell of warm soil and rosemary. Cicadas hummed in the distance. For a few moments, we walked in silence, the kind that isn't uncomfortable, but isn't settled either. You've done a beautiful job with this place, Daniel said finally. It feels peaceful. Thank you, I replied. It didn't always. It took time. Most things worth having do. He smiled at that, but I noticed his hands were clasped tightly in front of him. Nervous. That caught my attention. We reached the fig tree, its branches casting soft shadows on the path. I stopped there, resting my hand on the rough bark. You wanted to talk about something, I said gently. He took a breath, long and careful. Yes, I did. For a moment, I saw him not as my daughter's boyfriend, but as a young man standing at the edge of a decision that felt bigger than him. It reminded me of my own past, of moments when I wished someone older had told me it was okay to be unsure. I care deeply about Emily, he said. She means everything to me. And I respect you, your family, your home. He paused, searching for the right words. I wanted to ask you something serious, but I didn't want to do it at the table. This felt more right. The garden seemed to hold its breath with us. I felt a tightening in my chest, not fear, but awareness. Whatever he was about to say mattered. I'm listening, I told him. He met my eyes then, steady despite the nerves. I want to build a future with your daughter. And before I take any steps forward, I wanted to hear your thoughts. Your honesty. That was it. No drama. No grand speech. Just sincerity. Still, it landed heavily. I thought of Emily as a little girl running barefoot through this same garden, laughing as she chased butterflies. I thought of the years that had passed too quickly, and of how life keeps asking us to let go in small, brave ways. We continued walking slowly now. I asked him questions, not as an interrogation, but as a conversation, about his values, his fears, how we saw partnership, responsibility, and patience. He answered without rushing, without trying to impress. As the sun dipped lower, I realized something about myself too, that this moment wasn't about losing my daughter, but about trusting the person she had chosen and trusting the woman she had become. When we reached the end of the path, I felt calmer than I had when we started. Whatever came next would need reflection, but something important had already shifted inside me. And that was only the beginning. We stayed near the far end of the garden for a while after that, the place where the ground dips slightly, the soil always stays cool. I could hear Emily moving around inside the house, cabinets opening and closing, the faint sound of her voice on the phone. Life continuing, unaware that something important was unfolding just a few steps away. Daniel didn't rush me for an answer. That impressed me more than anything he'd said. He simply stood there, hands relaxed now, shoulders no longer tense. I realized he had said what he needed to say, and he was willing to let the silence do its work. I broke it gently. When my husband was alive, I began, surprising myself by bringing him into the conversation. He used to say that the hardest part of loving someone is accepting that you don't control their path. You only walk alongside them for a while. Daniel nodded, listening closely. I've walked alongside Emily her whole life, I continued, held her hand when she was afraid, stepped back when she needed space. Watching her grow has been the greatest privilege of my life. I looked at him then. So when you say you want a future with her, I hear both hope and responsibility. That's exactly how it feels, he said quietly. I don't take it lightly. We resumed walking, the gravel crunching softly beneath our shoes. The late afternoon light painted everything in warm tones, and the roses along the fence seemed more vivid than usual. I found myself noticing details I'd often overlooked, like the way the breeze stirred the leaves, or how the shadows stretched longer with each passing minute. Can I ask you something? I said. Of course. What made you come to me first? He didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the house, then back at the garden. Because I know how much she values your opinion. And because I wanted you to know that I see her not just as someone I love, but as someone who comes from a strong, thoughtful woman. That caught me off guard. Compliments at my age land differently. They aren't about appearance or charm. They're about acknowledgement. And that kind of acknowledgement stays with you. We reached the small bench near the herbs, and I sat down, motioning for him to do the same. The scent of basil and mint hung in the air. For a moment, I felt the weight of my own journey pressing in. The years since my husband passed, the quiet evenings, the slow rediscovery of who I was beyond being a wife and a mother. Daniel, I said, choosing my words carefully, I can't give you permission or deny you a future. That belongs to Emily, but I can tell you what I hope for her. He leaned forward slightly, attentive. I hope she chooses someone who listens when it's hard, who stays curious when things feel routine, and who treats commitment as something living, not fixed. Someone who understands that love changes shape over time, and that's not a failure. He smiled softly. That's what I want too. With her. We sat there longer than I expected. The conversation drifted naturally from serious topics to lighter ones. He told me about his childhood, his parents' long marriage, the lessons he learned from watching them work through disagreements without raising their voices. I shared stories from my own past, mistakes I made when I was younger, choices I would rethink if given the chance. At some point, laughter found its way into the space between us. It surprised me how easy it felt, not familiar, but comfortable, respectful. When Emily finally came outside, phone in hand, she stopped short when she saw us sitting together. Am I interrupting? She asked, half joking. No, I said, standing up. We were just talking. She looked from me to Daniel, curiosity flickering across her face. He met her gaze with a small smile, nothing secretive, nothing shared at my expense. That mattered. As we walked back toward the house, I felt a subtle shift inside myself. A door opening, perhaps. Not to something new with Daniel, but to a deeper understanding of my role in this stage of life. I wasn't being replaced or left behind. I was being invited to trust. That evening, after they left, I returned to the garden alone. The air had cooled, and the sky was streaked with soft colors fading into night. I stood by the fig tree again, resting my hand on its trunk, and thought about how roots and branches both matter. How growth doesn't mean breaking away, but reaching outward. I didn't have all the answers, but I felt steadier than before. And I knew this conversation, this unexpected walk, had changed something in me. The next few weeks passed quietly, but not without a subtle undercurrent I couldn't ignore. Life returned to its usual rhythm on the surface. I tended the garden, went to work, cooked familiar meals. Emily and Daniel visited on weekends, sometimes together, sometimes separately. Yet something had shifted inside me after that walk, like a thought that keeps gently tapping until you finally turn toward it. I found myself watching them more closely, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. The way Emily listened when Daniel spoke, how he waited rather than talked over her. The small signs of partnership that only reveal themselves when no one is trying to perform. It reminded me of what real connection looks like when it's built on patience instead of urgency. One afternoon, Daniel came by alone. Emily had stayed late at work, and he had offered to drop off a book she'd left behind. I was surprised to see him, standing on the porch with the same respectful posture he always carried. "I hope this is okay," he said. "I didn't want to just leave it in the mailbox." "It's fine," I replied. "Come in. I was about to make some tea." We sat at the kitchen table this time, sunlight spilling through the window and warming the worn wood beneath our hands. The house felt different without Emily's energy filling it, quieter but not uncomfortable. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," he said after a few sips. "About what you said regarding love changing shape." I nodded. It tends to, whether we expect it to or not. He looked thoughtful. My parents didn't always understand that. They stayed together, but there were years where they stopped really seeing each other. I don't want that. I want to keep learning. About her. About myself. His honesty struck me again. Not polished, not dramatic, just real. I realized then that this wasn't about him seeking approval. It was about him seeking understanding, maybe even guidance, from someone who had lived long enough to know how fragile and resilient relationships can be. "You know," I said, "when you reach my age, you start to see your life as a series of chapters. Some you'd reread fondly, others you'd revise if you could, but each one teaches you something." He smiled. "I feel like I'm just starting to write mine." We talked for over an hour. About work, about balance, about the quiet fear of making the wrong choices. At one point, he asked me how I learned to forgive myself for past mistakes. The question surprised me with its depth. "I'm still learning," I answered honestly. "But I've learned that carrying regret doesn't protect you. It only weighs you down. Growth comes from facing what you've done and choosing differently next time." When Emily finally arrived, breathless and apologetic for being late, she found us laughing softly over a story from my college days. She raised an eyebrow playfully. "Looks like I missed something." "Just conversation," I said, "the kind that passes time quickly." That night, after they left together, I sat in the living room with the lights dimmed, reflecting on how natural everything had felt. There was no boundary crossed, no confusion. Just connection rooted in respect. I realized how rare that kind of connection becomes as we grow older, how guarded we often are. In the days that followed, I noticed a change in myself. I felt more open, more willing to engage with the world, rather than observe it from a distance. I joined a local walking group, something I had postponed for years. I called an old friend I hadn't spoken to in a long time. It was as if that garden conversation had gently reminded me that my story wasn't finished, even if it looked different now. One evening, as I watered the roses, Emily came out and joined me. She watched the water soak into the soil before speaking. "Daniel told me he talked to you," she said carefully. "About us?" "Yes," I replied. "He did." She looked at me then, searching my face. "And I met her gaze with a calm I truly felt. I see two people trying to do something meaningful. That's all I ever hoped for. Her shoulders relaxed, and she smiled, a smile that carried both relief and gratitude. In that moment, I understood that my role wasn't to stand in the way or to lead the way, but to walk alongside when invited. As the sun set and the garden slipped into shadow, I felt a quiet certainty settle within me. This chapter of my life was about trust, about letting conversations open doors rather than close them. And whatever came next, I knew I was ready to meet it with clarity and grace. Winter was creeping in, and the garden had taken on a quieter, more introspective mood. The roses had gone dormant, the fig tree stood bare against the gray sky, and the stone path was slick with early morning frost. Yet even in this quiet, I felt the growth of the past months lingering in me, like roots stretching beneath the surface, unseen but steady. It was in this season that Daniel came over for a Sunday visit, Emily by his side. The air felt crisp, but the warmth of connection between the three of us had never been stronger. We started inside, sharing tea and scones at the kitchen table, the steam curling into the cold morning air. Emily laughed easily at a small joke Daniel made, and for a moment I allowed myself to simply watch. Not as a mother scrutinizing, but as a witness to a new phase of her life. She had grown in ways I hadn't noticed day to day. And Daniel had grown too, not just in confidence, but in the patience and respect he carried when he was with her, and when he was with me. After a while, Daniel asked if I'd join them outside. I felt a gentle familiarity now with this invitation. It no longer carried the subtle tension of the first garden walk. Emily had gone ahead, chatting lightly, while Daniel and I stayed back, walking slowly along the frost-tipped path. The smell of damp earth mixed with the sharpness of winter air, and the world felt hushed, almost sacred. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, his breath visible in the cool air, "for the way you spoke with me that first day. It's shaped the way I approach things. With her, with myself. With life, really." I smiled, feeling a warmth that belied the cold around us. "Thank you for listening," I replied, "and for respecting her, and for respecting what we've built here as a family. That matters more than words can say." We stopped near the fig tree, now bare and skeletal against the gray sky. I rested my hand on the rough bark, remembering the conversation months before. "Do you see yourself in this long term?" I asked. Not just as her boyfriend, but as someone willing to grow alongside her. He hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of thoughtfulness. "I do. And I know it won't always be easy, but I want to learn, and I want to try. That's why I wanted to speak with you again, even if it's just a small moment in the garden. I wanted to share that with you before the next chapter begins." The simplicity of his words struck me. There was no grand gesture, no pretense, just honesty and intention. It reminded me that the most profound connections often grow quietly, not in dramatic declarations, but in everyday consistency and care. We walked together to the back gate, the frost crunching softly beneath our feet. I realized then that Daniel had become more than just my daughter's partner in my eyes. He was a person who actively chose to engage with life thoughtfully, someone who could be trusted to walk beside Emily rather than lead or follow blindly. I felt a rare sense of peace. When Emily returned to our side, she squeezed my hand lightly. "I'm glad you got to walk with him," she said, as if she knew that something important had happened again. I nodded. "Yes, it matters, the way we connect, the way we understand each other. And I see that you both are choosing carefully together." The day faded gently, the garden bathed in soft amber light from the low winter sun. I stood a while longer by the fig tree, letting the cool air touch my face, and I thought about time, the way it moves and shifts, the way it asks us to trust the people we care about, and the moments that teach us that love, respect, and patience can exist across generations. That day, I left the garden feeling a quiet contentment I hadn't felt in years, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. Because conversations had been had, understanding had been offered, and respect had been mutual. I realized that life isn't about controlling the path, but about walking it fully aware, seeing the people we love clearly, and letting them see us too. As I closed the gate behind me and watched Emily and Daniel walk toward the house, I felt a sense of closure, not an ending, but a fulfillment, a chapter that had begun with curiosity, grown through honesty, and ended with reflection and quiet hope. The garden had witnessed it all, and in its stillness, I understood that some of the most meaningful moments in life come when we least expect them, in simple walks, honest words, and shared understanding. I stood there a little longer, breathing in the cold air, and smiled. Life, I realized, keeps teaching us. Even in our 50s, even when we think we've seen it all, there are still lessons in trust, connection, and the courage to let love evolve naturally.